A mother's love is universally understood to be the most undeniable force in nature. It is an instinct woven into our very DNA, a fierce protective drive that commands a parent to tear the world apart at its seams if their child is in danger. But what happens when that instinct is entirely, terrifyingly absent? What happens when a 2-year-old girl vanishes into thin air, and the person who should be frantically leading the search party is instead entering hot body contests, getting tattoos, and dancing under the neon lights of local nightclubs? In the sweltering summer of 2008, a single 911 call from a frantic grandmother in Orlando, Florida, shattered the illusion of a normal suburban family and birthed a media circus the likes of which the world had never seen. It was a case that featured an invisible nanny, a phantom job at Universal Studios, and the lingering, undeniable odor of human decomposition locked inside the trunk of a white Pontiac Sunfire. This is the story of Caylee Anthony, the 31 days of silence that sealed her fate, and the trial that fractured the American justice system. To understand the sheer magnitude of the Caylee Anthony case, you have to understand the 31 days. On July 15, 2008, Cindy Anthony made a frantic, tearful call to 911 dispatchers. For a month, her daughter, 22-year-old Caylee, had been evasive, making endless excuses about why Cindy couldn't see her 2-year-old granddaughter, Caylee. Caylee claimed she was working late, that Caylee was at the beach, or that she was staying with a nanny named Zanny Fernandez Gonzalez, a woman the family affectionately referred to as Zanny. But on that sweltering July day, the excuses finally ran out. Cindy and her husband, George, recovered Caylee's abandoned car from a local tow yard. When George, a former police officer, opened the door, he was hit with a smell he recognized immediately from his days in law enforcement. It was the distinct, sickening odor of a decomposing body. When confronted by her terrified mother, Caylee's reaction was not one of a panicked parent. It was cold, calculated, and deeply unsettling. She finally admitted that Caylee had been missing for 31 days, claiming that Zanny the Nanny had kidnapped her in a local park. For an entire month, while her daughter was supposedly in the hands of a violent kidnapper, Caylee had moved in with her boyfriend, shopped at Target, rented movies at Blockbuster, and partied at Orlando nightclubs. There were no frantic searches, no missing posters, no tearful pleas to the police. There was only a void where a mother's panic should have been. When detectives brought Caylee in for questioning, they were met with a labyrinth of lies so elaborate, it bordered on pathological. The investigation into Caylee's disappearance quickly devolved into a bizarre, surreal psychological thriller. Caylee Anthony proved to be a master architect of alternate realities. She confidently told detectives she worked as an event planner at Universal Studios, claiming she had been using her connections there to secretly investigate the kidnapping. In one of the most astonishing moments in modern criminal investigation history, Caylee actively led 2 seasoned homicide detectives through the bustling corridors of Universal Studios. She walked them past security guards, down hallways, and up to a set of double doors, maintaining the facade that her office and her alibi lay just beyond them. It wasn't until she reached a dead end that she finally turned to the detectives, her elaborate house of cards collapsing in real time, and admitted, "I don't work here." She hadn't worked there for years. The detectives soon discovered that Zanny Fernandez Gonzalez, the supposed kidnapper, was a real woman who had merely filled out an apartment application on the same day Caylee had visited the complex. She had never met Caylee or Caylee. Every lead, every name, every location Caylee provided was a phantom. Meanwhile, forensic teams were tearing apart the white Pontiac Sunfire. Air samples from the trunk tested overwhelmingly positive for chemical compounds associated with human decomposition, specifically indicating the presence of chloroform. Additionally, a single hair found in the trunk showed root banding, a microscopic phenomenon that typically only occurs in hair taken from a deceased body. The tragic reality was solidifying. They were no longer looking for a missing toddler. They were looking for a body. As the summer turned into fall, the face of little Caylee Anthony was broadcast across every television screen in America. Cable news networks, led by fiery commentators, turned the tragedy into a nightly spectacle, dubbing Caylee "Tot Mom" and fueling public outrage. The public had already tried and convicted Caylee in the court of public opinion. She wasn't just a suspect. She was the most hated woman in America. But despite massive search efforts involving thousands of volunteers scouring swamps and woodlands, Caylee remained lost. That is, until December 11th, 2008. Less than half a mile from the Anthony family home, in a swampy, wooded area frequently submerged by heavy rains, a meter reader made a gruesome discovery. Scattered among the brush and garbage bags were the skeletal remains of a small child. The medical examiner confirmed the worst. It was Caylee, but the condition of the remains painted a horrifying picture. A piece of silver duct tape was found attached to the hair and skull, positioned over where the child's mouth and nose would have been. Because the remains were fully skeletonized, a definitive cause of death could not be determined, but the manner of death was ruled a homicide. For the prosecution, the narrative was complete. Caylee Anthony, desperate to free herself from the burdens of motherhood and live a carefree lifestyle, had used chloroform to subdue her daughter, suffocated her with duct tape, and eventually tossed her into the swamp. In May 2011, the trial of Caylee Anthony began. The prosecution laid out their timeline, highlighting Caylee's partying, the Bella Vita, beautiful life tattoo she acquired while her daughter was missing, and the devastating computer searches for chloroform made on the family computer. They painted a portrait of a narcissistic, remorseless killer. But then, defense attorney Jose Baez dropped a bombshell that completely rewrote the narrative. He told the jury that Caylee was not murdered, but had tragically drowned in the family swimming pool. According to Baez, George Anthony found the lifeless child and covered up the accident to protect Caylee. Furthermore, Baez alleged a dark history of sexual abuse inflicted upon Caylee by her father, arguing that this trauma had trained her to lie and suppress horrific events. The defense's strategy was to introduce reasonable doubt into the prosecution's theory of premeditated murder. They relentlessly attacked the forensic science, pointing out that the medical examiner could not definitively say how Caylee died. They argued that the smell in the trunk could have been from a bag of rotting garbage, and that the duct tape could have been moved by water or animals. The prosecution had a compelling story of a terrible mother, but they had no witnesses to a murder, no confession, and an undetermined cause of death. To convict someone of first-degree murder, the jury must be convinced beyond a reasonable doubt. It is not enough to believe the defendant is a liar or a bad person. On July 5th, 2011, the verdict was read. Caylee Anthony was found guilty of providing false information to law enforcement, but on the charges of first-degree murder, aggravated child abuse, and aggravated manslaughter. The jury foreperson spoke the two words that sent a shockwave across the globe: not guilty. The reaction was immediate and ferocious. Social media exploded with rage, and protesters swarmed the courthouse. The jurors were vilified, but they later explained that while they found Caylee's behavior sickening, the prosecution simply failed to prove exactly how Caylee died. Today, Caylee Anthony remains free, a pariah forever tethered to the tragedy that bears her name. The Anthony family remains forever fractured, broken by grief and accusations. But in the center of the media storms and legal maneuvers remains the only undeniable truth of this entire saga. A bright, beautiful 2-year-old girl named Caylee Marie Anthony lost her life before it ever truly began. While the justice system rendered its final verdict, the world is left to wonder what truly happened in those 31 days of silence.